Hi, everybody. Thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar in the Clubhouse of Development webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing annual giving and how to turn your club members and community members into donors. Before I tell you a little bit about Cogeo and our speaker, I want to say if you have any questions, you can enter them into the GoToWebinar platform, and we'll review those after the presentation. I'll introduce you to who we are. Cogeo specializes in sports-related 501c3 fundraising and organizational sustainability. Our work spans multiple sports within the nonprofit industry and geographical regions within the U.S. And the Cogeo team management has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. One of the key reasons that we're passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs such as yourselves is that our executive management has both played and coached the game. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob Cusell, who is your speaker today, is now the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I will pass it to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mel, and hello, everyone. Thanks for coming in and tuning in. So as Mel pointed out, slide number 3 shows that we're going to discuss the fourth of 8 webinars around the Clubhouse of Development. Today, we're still on the bottom floor. We're going to look at turning community and club members into donors. The fourth slide, the next slide, again, demonstrates the Clubhouse. And we talked about marketing and PR, events, managing data. And today we're going to look at the left room, which is annual and membership giving, generally unrestricted giving. So it goes right to operations, which is really great and really adds significantly to the membership dues. Next slide. What are the goals for today? Context. So you'll learn why annual and membership giving is the second cornerstone of the Clubhouse and fundraising work. Second, you'll understand the true value of annual and membership giving within the lifetime experience of a donor. So it's not a one-off thing, year to year to year. And then the third area we'll look at is data, the vital role of data, and how clean and organized data systems can really fuel the rest of the Clubhouse smart home. So what is annual giving? Slide number 6. It's really mass appeal, right? And it used to be very cumbersome and very expensive, and because snail mail was just that expensive, and letters and things, and it was also very labor intensive in terms of getting a mailing out. Today, not so much. Everything's done by email for the most part. We've seen massive increases in online giving in terms of practices and people migrating from offline to online, particularly with retail, smaller gifts like this. And so what we're seeing now is no longer, we see some mail appeals. I get them. I'm sure you get them. But it's really leveraging email and social media and leveraging push-pull tactics, meaning you push out a message, call to action, and you pull them back into your website for a transaction or some kind of survey or something. So that's how that generally works. And in terms of best practices, really it's all about stewardship. So what happens after the gift is made, and then a series of appeals to an intentionally segmented prospect and donor database periodically throughout the year. So with the clubs that we work with, or the leagues or the governing bodies, we do 1 to 2 to 3 appeals a year, at a minimum 1, and that would be a November-December appeal, which is where most of the giving occurs. But there are other ways also to focus on that. Giving Tuesday, you may have heard of. It's in November, and we've seen a lot of clubs leverage that and just participate in Giving Tuesday. It's becoming less and less effective, by the way. It's kind of fading out. No surprise there. So next slide. So how do you implement this, right? In terms of, what kind of annual giving program should you do, given who you are and how you are with your membership. So 5 things stand out. The first is the easiest, right? You have somebody subscribe, let's say 10 to 15 to whatever amount dollars per month, and they essentially do that every month. Another would be an event. And generally, we like to put in soccer-thons. And this is particularly effective with all clubs, matter of fact. We're about to do 2 soccer-thons in the next month, one in San Francisco, the other in Springfield, Missouri. And we'll look at a case study later on in the presentation on what Orlando City did in February and how that worked. Generally, if you're in a capital campaign, a build-out campaign, where you really want to focus on that, an event-thon is a great way to engage the entire community so that they feel like they're part of the actual campaign itself and they can participate. The third area is crowdfunding. We all know what that is, which is picking a specific area, targeting a specific segment, and raising against a specific amount of dollars within a specific time frame. All sorts of great tools out there to do that. We recommend Classy, which is a partner of Cogeo. They've got the most robust suite of products as it relates to both executing on a soccer-thon in terms of back-end systems, as well as crowdfunding, and even for annual giving. So they're highly recommended. Classy, CLASSY. You can also do annual giving as related to a signature event, as we just talked about. Giving Tuesday, certainly around the holiday, year-end appeal is a must. So at a minimum, there should be a year-end appeal that actually focuses on financial aid or something that'll make people feel good in a specific area where they could give. So it's really just executing, as I mentioned, at a minimum, one appeal in mid-November, late November, early December. So why is it important? Next slide, number 8. Why is it annual giving? Well, obviously you can see there are multiple reasons, over a dozen. The first is it really increases public awareness of the organization and mission, and nobody gets offended if you ask. It's pretty much ingrained in American society. The word philanthropy was pretty much unknown 25 years ago. Now I hear it all the time. Well, not all the time, but you hear it. And so there's no stigma as it relates to actually asking. People expect it, particularly if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, and that's part of your ethos. So it really does increase public awareness in no way in a negative way. Second, you're creating pipeline tactics to attract new and incremental donors. The third, it's really a great opportunity to steward their gifts, particularly larger donors. You can engage volunteers to help you run the program. And the best part is you're raising incremental funds that otherwise you'd never see, that can really dramatically impact the club. And we've got so many cases and points about that, where they've been fundamentally transformed because they've implemented at a minimum an annual giving program and a major gifts program, if they're not in a capital campaign for a build-out, for a facility build-out. It's an opportunity to present a new or different image. So if there's a new technical director or a new club president, a new board chair, it's a great way to message that out and getting people engaged. It's good internal community building, particularly if you engage volunteers and engage the donors in a very positive way. You're working externally here, so you're actually going to build strong partnerships within the community through annual giving. It'll advance marketing and PR initiatives, because invariably you're going to discuss the club and you're going to talk about all the great things that are occurring at the club and why people should support it. It's an opportunity to honor, thank, and recognize people as well. And it's also the first step in moving donors up in the house of development. Point here is, if you do an annual giving appeal and you launch it, let's say in 2021, in November 2021, it's your first time ever, and lo and behold, somebody gives you $1,000, and you do a wealth analysis on them, and it turns out, well, they're multimillionaires and they can do a lot more than $1,000 if they're handled properly. And so that's moving them up. But people like to give signals in terms of what they can do by giving a large gift. see it all the time. And then most importantly, you're actually gathering data, right? As you know, Facebook is getting a lot of heat right now because it's pretty much public that the reason why they're operating is they're grabbing people's data and they're monetizing data, which is something Google will not do. They refuse to do that. Well, here, we're not going to behave like Facebook. Rather, we're going to behave more like Google, which is we're going to positively leverage the data that we have in terms of properly communicating with our membership around external giving. So as you can see, all of these issues are positive. There's nothing negative at all. So the next slide, number 9. So obviously there's some challenges. Otherwise everybody would be giving to everyone. So what are the 4 biggest challenges that we've identified? Well, there are a lot of 501c3s in every community. And so it's really standing out in an ever-increasing crowd of noise, right? So the key is the messaging, who's the messenger in terms of what you're saying and how you're saying it and who's delivering it. And so that's really important. If you're going to do this well, you're going to need people involved in that process. At a minimum, we like to have 1 point person at a minimum. And generally, working with Cogeo takes about 5 hours a week for one individual within an agency because we bring all the other stuff in terms of execution. The third, some clubs have thousands of members. Others are smaller with hundreds of members. Regardless, these are fairly large data populations. So you've got to manage that population set. Good news here is we've got a really strong partnership with Salesforce.com. And anytime we initiate a new client partnership, we implement and position our client on Salesforce, which is a donor management system, an external communication management system that's fully integrated with a bunch of other software products, including our wealth screening product, which is to say, once we go to work with somebody, we'll take their entire membership and anybody else on whom they have data, and we do a wealth analysis to understand what their potential net worth is. And if it's over $1 million, they get identified. So it's really important to have that data in terms of managing the data in a proper location, which, as I mentioned, is Salesforce.com, whose product, by the way, if you don't know, is free to the 501c3 industry, and it provides up to 8 licenses, which is fantastic. And then the fourth area is you're really telling a story, right? You're getting people with affinity to your club who are already members, who are paying dues for the most part if they're not on financial aid, and you're trying to engage them even further financially. So you've got to make it compelling. And that's really important. And generally, the focus should be in a specific area within the club if you're not into facility building. And we find that financial aid is an attractive area. Not for everybody, but for many people, it is very attractive. At least that's what the data is borne out over the years. So the next slide, number 10. So people think, oh, corporate giving is biggest or foundation giving. No, it's 70% plus is driven by individuals. Now there's a skew here, obviously, because of the church, right? Tithing is a big part of that. But still, 70% of all development dollars are driven by individuals. And then foundations, 16%. Corporations, only 5%. They're not that generous, unfortunately. And then bequests, which are wills and estates, almost 10%. So now we're going to look at a couple of case studies on how donors can be moved and transitioned from a very minor situation, modest initial gift, to over a lifetime, to, in this case, a 30-year span, if they have the capacity to doing transformational stuff. Now, Stanford University, I worked there as director of major gifts and worked closely with the athletic department, particularly the soccer, the two soccer teams, and actually directed the first stadium build out for Stanford University back in 1998. But let's talk about Phil Knight. Phil Knight is the current chairman of Nike, and he was the founder of Nike, or is the founder of Nike. And he went to University of Oregon undergrad, and then he went to Stanford Business School. And at Stanford Business School, he put together his game plan for essentially what was at first a sneaker company. So the initial Nikes, they were, I think, the wafer shoes, very lightweight, completely different from any other trainer out there, and really innovative. And so Phil's a really smart guy. So what he did was he went to the University of Oregon athletic department and the track team specifically and cross country team. And he went to Stanford University to the same athletic department, track team. And he offered pro bono to donate as many of these sneakers, these revolutionary sneakers, trainers, whatever you want to call them, as they needed for their athletic squads. Well, sure enough, the performance increased dramatically. These were transformational shoes at the time. And, well, we know the story, right? Nike is arguably one of the largest companies, sporting wear companies globally, highly successfully. And he obviously has made a killing with this. And so whereas his first donation was literally in kind, it was not cash, they actually stewarded him tremendously, really, really well as he grew his company. And over the years, he's given over $400 million to the university, and including what is now the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program, as well as the business school, the School of Management, Stanford Business School of Management, which is named after Phil Knight. It's the Knight complex. It's huge. I mean, it's absolutely massive. So the point here is, anytime a donor makes a gift to your club, if you implement this, you really need to steward them well and make sure that they're getting what they need, particularly if they've got the type of potential, which you'll find out because of the well screening like this. So this is an extraordinary story, but we've seen this happen in multiple areas, multiple institutions, globally, really. Okay, the next slide, number 12, is a more recent example I mentioned earlier. So this is Orlando City, which is a large club. I think they have something like 5 competitive teams for each age group. And so it's very, very evolved. They've got a complex. Some of you may have been to it. It's Seminole Soccer Complex down in Sanford, Florida, right outside of Orlando. And we're in the process of renovating that complex in anticipation of the World Cup 2026 and having teams train there. And because we're in a campaign, we decided the best way to engage the families would be to do a soccer-thon, the first annual soccer-thon, leveraging an indoor facility, as you can see. And it was highly, highly successful, even though we only had a 5-week run-up to it, and only about a third of the club participated because of COVID. So the net is, I think they ran it for 24 hours, and they raised nearly $80,000. And we're predicting next year that will double because they'll have much more participation. We'll probably do it outdoors, have a bigger footprint, and because we'll hopefully be entirely through the pandemic by then, it should be good. What we also did was we honored our first annual community award winner, which is a great way to engage. And these funds, and we market it this way, basically went to help with the completion of the renovation of Seminole Soccer Complex. So great way to engage many, many families. And yeah, it was very successful. They were thrilled. So next slide. Let's look at some data, right? Because I've mentioned several times now how important November, December, in terms of that time of the year is. We've got data for 2018. It lags generally about 2 to 3 years. But what do we know? That the average online donation is $128. And then the average annual donation for recurring donors is almost 3 times that, which is the point about stewarding and making sure that you're stewarding them as best as possible. And then the second part of the slide, 28% of nonprofits, over a quarter, raise between 26 and 50% of their annual funds from their year-end asks. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so that's why you need to consider it at a minimum in terms of launching a fundraising effort. So the next slide, number 14. Now we're going to speak a little more specifically about best practices in terms of what are the tactics that need to be leveraged to make sure that this works year to year to year. So what's the strategic rollout in terms of which tactics? So you need to determine the appeal frequency. We find that 2 appeals a year is pretty good for clubs. 3 is a bit, it's aggressive. And when I say 2, it would be something like definitely the year-end appeal, and then sometime March, April, May. And generally speaking, particularly if you're on a July 1 to June 30th, if they've given in the year-end appeal, they should not be getting a solicitation in the March, just once a year. Again, I mentioned this earlier, the second bullet point, which is who's going to be the appeal author? Who's going to resonate the most with the membership? Really important. Is it a coach? Is it a technical director? Who is it? That's really important. And then tactical follow-ups. Making sure that particularly if you're getting larger gifts in, that you're really understanding who are these people and how do they like to be thanked, and you do all that very tactically. Second area, storytelling is becoming increasingly digital, right? So an email is generally not enough. So any access to quality design and then videography can really help push that message. And we do that and help our clients with that. When we talk about major gifts during the next webinar, or corporate or foundation giving, we'll cover the case statement. And if you go to cogeo.us/case, CASE, you'll see a lot of good case statements, many of which are soccer clubs. So storytelling, and again, differentiate yourself. I mentioned Salesforce.com, so database management, which allows you to segment and then integrate all these other technological systems, QuickBooks. It's got an API to the well screening, as I mentioned, and then several other APIs. Leadership, making sure that you've got the right amount of people that are helping and that are managing this. So whenever we put together a campaign, we put together what's called an advisory group, a campaign advisory group, or a steering committee to the campaign. And these are volunteers that really get what's going on at the club and that really want to help in terms of advancing the concept of raising funds and really making a difference. So right now we're doing a number of capital campaigns around the country. I mentioned Orlando City. We're also doing Springfield, Missouri, renovating their complex. Frederick, Maryland, we're doing a build out there. They just bought 140 acres. And we're putting together a steering committee of 20 individuals. And so far we've talked to 6 of them, and they are terrific. So they've got the right people involved. In Oregon, we're working with Oregon Youth Soccer Association to build their first state level complex. And we're getting a lot of really good traction with some key people, many of whom you've heard of, players who used to play on the national women's team, et cetera. So that's really exciting. And I could give you other examples. But leadership is important. And then something called a full funnel approach, which is making sure that everything is integrating in terms of messaging and how you're approaching that, particularly if you have other systems that you're using. So the next slide, number 15. As I mentioned, CRM system, highly recommend Salesforce.com, their free program. It's, again, 8 licenses, which is incredible. Does a great job, arguably the best system out there in terms of data management, and then has built-in stewardship tools, which will remind you. It's really cool that way. And then it really, in terms of succession and people that'll come after you, you're going to leave a really strong legacy in terms of data set and how they'll be able to leverage it in the future. And that's really important because you're nothing without strong data. So the next slide. So what are the key takeaways? And again, this is the last slide before we take any questions if there are any. So make sure that you optimize the balance of major gift work and annual membership giving based on your internal capacity to execute. And as a startup, you're going to want to start with annual giving and membership giving and an event. And then you can progress into major gifts as well as corporate and then foundation. We like to activate all of it at once because that's what we do. And, you know, it just means doing the research on businesses, doing the research on foundations, doing the analysis on the membership in terms of wealth potential, aggregating a steering committee or an advisory group, and putting together a case statement and any other supporting documentation, and boom, you're off to the races. Now, the next webinar, we're going to look at corporate and how to approach corporate and foundations. And the corporate strategy is a little bit different. We'll talk about that extensively, both in terms of giving and then sponsorships. Annual giving should be viewed as the entry point into a long-term relationship and a development strategy, e.g. Phil Knight of Nike. It's a great example, probably the best example, and there are many. And the most important, start small, be modest when you do it right, and then grow incrementally over time. And the data management is probably the most important piece of all this because it literally drives all activities, including stewardship. So I'll stop there, Webb, and I'll pass it back to you, Mel.
Thanks, Rob. We do have one question, and it may have been answered, but we'll go over it again. When is the best time to send an annual appeal?
Yeah, definitely November, December, without a doubt. Or you can try and stand out and do it in, after tax day, generally speaking, because people are stressed, between January and April 15. So as I mentioned earlier, early May is not a bad time. But the most common is definitely November, December.
Okay, great, thanks. And I will second that and say that we have a resource that's attached to the Tennessee Soccer portal, and it breaks down how exactly to put together your own annual appeal. It's a very specific guide, so you can find that on the portal. Speaking of that, we will also make sure that we have the recorded webinar available to rewatch within the next 24 hours. So you'll hear from Hans, and he will send a follow-up email soon. All right, thanks for Rob for being here, and thanks everybody for joining. Have a great rest of your day.